Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Bite clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Zach Donohue. He is the writer and director, known for the terrifying Second Life horror film The Den, which you have heard me talk about ad nauseum on this podcast. And his latest is Uncomfortably Numb, a serialized audio thriller, and he has an upcoming series called The Unknowable. Welcome to the show!
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Show.
Mary Beth introduced me to The Den, and I instantly became obsessed with it. And this is so exciting to be able to talk to you about it. But before we do get to your creative stuff, let's take it back to the very beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
Yeah, so my dad was always, he was a big fan of horror all his life, and when I was a kid, it wasn't one of those things where, let's keep horror away from Zach. It was very, open and, kind of nurturing thing where, every night he would watch a horror movie, when I would go to bed. And sometimes in the nights that I couldn't sleep, I would, kind of get up and walk into the living room and just be like, what are you watching? And then just kind of, he'd make room for me on the couch and, we'd kind of, just enjoy this time. And he wasn't like, showing me like I Spit on Your Grave or like dark stuff like that.
Right.
He was letting me watch like Ed Wood Jr.'s The Bride of the Monster. Okay. Which is, a silly movie with Bela Lugosi that as a kid was very traumatizing because it had this octopus that, Bela was feeding people to. So that, kind of traumatized me. And then he showed me the Gorgon.
Oh, we talked about that last year on Little Cuts. Yeah. We were going down a folk horror path, and it was Hammer horror for that.
It was Hammer horror. That was for Hammer horror.
Yeah, I don't know. As a kid, it's just the snakes for hair and the people turning to stone. That freaked me the heck out. And so he showed me all of these, kind of like weirder, more offbeat movies than, the usual fare. And then as I got a little bit older, I started to, kind of like 5 or 6, I started to realize that he in the 70s and 80s had made these Super 8 films with his friends.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And I'll promote them. You can go to his Vimeo page. But
so he posted them. It's like no one ever posts their old movies they made when they were younger. That makes me so happy.
Whenever we ask people if anyone has like their old, tapes, like, oh, I have, I'm never going to show anyone. So that is so cool to see.
It's really cool. And, like over the years, it's like I've gotten more proficient at, editing and whatnot. I've kind of remastered some of his movies and put more sound design and score. So it's kind of like movies that have been like, 30 years in the making. But, so when it was funny because when I was like, 5 or 6, I'd be like, Dad, can you show me Haunted Dreams? What's Haunted Dreams? And he's like, no. You got to wait until you're a little. And this is a movie that he had made like 2 years before, he claims, before Nightmare on Elm Street. And when he finally showed it to me around like 7, I saw it was like this 5-minute Super 8 movie where this guy keeps having these nightmares where he's dreaming of this other couple. And in the dream, he keeps like wandering the woods and he finds this terrifying Gene Autry mask. And then he gets a machete and like starts like attacking the couple. And at the end, the couple, rises against him and they wind up cutting his head off. And so it's like this super extreme movie that, well, not
Holy
that extreme,
shit.
but like he was always very much like, oh, you can't see it because of that decapitation at the end. And then I finally saw it and I was like, Dad, that was awesome. And he had all these other movies. And as soon as he kind of saw that I was into those, he was like, well, I still have a Super 8 camera. Let's, start making some movies. And so we made a sequel to Haunted Dreams where I was now the star. And then we made like a vampire movie called
This is
Vampire
the coolest
Fun.
thing I've ever heard.
This is so
That is
cool.
so cool.
Oh, thank you.
What did
happy to that.
What did your dad end up doing, like, for his career? Was he in any, like, creative, like, in a movie adjacent field at all?
It was always like kind of like a deep passion of he's a lover of movies and he's a great writer and he always like kind of edits the stuff that I write. He kind of got into the human services field where he met my mom and then the two of them just really kind of strived in that field and kind of did this awesome, really kind of gave back and still are to the community and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, so my childhood was spent like running through cemeteries, being chased by my dad's middle-aged friends, playing vampires. And
That's amazing.
That sounds like the coolest. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool. And
Because you always hear stories of kids being, like, discouraged from making, like, oh, you're just making your movies. But it's like with your dad and his friends, like, that is just so cool to have that kind of encouraged as you were growing up.
Yeah, no, it was really great. And then, like, when I was like, I want to go to film school, it was super expensive. We didn't make a lot of money. But, like, at that time, like, they were like, yeah, we're going to kind of let you, like, it was kind of like a dream that he always wanted. And he was kind of like very excited about that. So, yeah.
That's so amazing. And you said that his videos are up on Vimeo?
Yeah.
Send us the link and we'll include it in the show notes
That'd be
that's
incredible.
okay.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Please, that's amazing.
Oh my God.
But yeah, no, so like, between, watching these movies with him at an early age and then making these movies and then just, kind of finding other horror movies as one does, I just kind of got more and more kind of into the world and
That's amazing. Do you remember the first movie a horror movie you ever saw?
So ever saw would be Bride of the Monster. And
Okay.
ever saw in a theater would be Ernest Scared Stupid.
Ernest Scared Stupid.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I saw you guys also did an episode on.
We did do an episode on that one. And I think I remember seeing that one in the movie theater too. And just, what a delight. What a delight that movie was.
Yeah. My favorite line of that movie that I still quote to this day is, how about a bumper sandwich, booger lips? Yeah. No, yeah. So, all my favorite horror movies, I have a wide taste between like the eclectic stuff that my dad kind of showed me at an early age and then finding The Shining, kind of when I was 8, really, that movie really, like kind of stuck in my craw. I got married last Halloween and my wife, I'm
getting married this Halloween.
Yes, congratulations. That's
congratulations to you too. That's awesome.
Yeah, congratulations.
But we did like, we're both in the film industry and my wife and I are huge, kind of Shining fans. And so we did kind of like a split horror theme, but also split just appreciation for all movies. But the two things from The Shining that I was able to kind of put into the wedding was that all of the cufflinks for the groomsmen were little axes from The Shining. And then when we after we did our, first dance, I told the DJ, I was like, I really, really want you to play Midnight, the Moon and Star. Is it Midnight, the Moon and Star? The song that's at the in the ballroom scene. And then we like opened the doors. We're like, we invite you into the dinner. And that song just came on. And then we like ushered everyone in, and just was so amazing. And like my horror, like it was this beautiful convergence of one of the best days of my life, the best day of my life, getting married, but also being able to marry that with appreciation of horror.
I just got so excited for my wedding, because my wedding's going to have a bunch of stuff like that too. So it's cool to hear you having that experience.
Yes,
and being
definitely
like,
embrace it.
Don't worry. We are.
Yes. I can't wait to hear how it comes out. Yeah. Or, see, I'm sure you'll post photos on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And Terry will be there, so he'll also be posting. So,
well, congratulations. That's great.
Oh, thank you. That's so neat.
That is really cool.
Wow. Okay, so you grew up on Hammer. You said you found The Shining, but what were some other favorites of yours growing up, like specific horror movies?
I guess obviously like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas. Those were all movies that like were kind of turning points for me, where I was already a big fan of horror, and then I saw those movies, and then it was like, okay, it widened the possibility of what horror could be, and that it's interesting because when I went to college, I had like a few experiences kind of in my early college years and post-college where I saw a few movies that just kind of like rocked my world. Just from not only the theater going experience, but just seeing the possibilities of like the storytelling. One of those was The Strangers. I remember that having like a really big effect on me. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York called Ticonderoga, and my parents
like the pencil. Sorry.
Like the pencil. And
I was just talking to someone about Ticonderoga pencils, because it's my cousins are way back to school, so that's the only reason that makes me laugh.
The pencils weren't made there, but they had like this, Revolutionary War fort and all this other historical stuff. And I was raised in this house that was like a mile into the woods, and to access the house, you had to drive across like a wooden bridge that was like dilapidated, and like crossing
Evil Dead much?
Evil Dead. It felt like, like crossing the bridge in Sorcerer, like every time we would get to it, like it was nuts. And there were a lot of times very early, like I think when I was like 8, I just wasn't good with babysitters, and like one time I like hid from a babysitter for like 4 hours, and I was a little shit. And so after a certain point, my parents were like, all right, you're just going to be in this house like when we go to work, and you don't need a babysitter at this point because you've already kind of proven yourself.
You've traumatized the babysitters. I think you're okay by yourself.
You would, as a babysitter, I would have. You were my worst nightmare.
Yes. I mean, I definitely have big regrets about that, and but so all that being said is that we lived really remote, and there were certain times when I would be at home watching a movie, and like weird things would happen. Like the first time I saw The Shining, we had like this big glass window and I heard this like weird sound, and I looked out, and there were these 2 deer with like big antlers, like going like viciously attacking each other. And I got on the phone. My parents.
Like, what the fuck? Like, was it nighttime? Or was it
no, it was daytime. It was the middle of the day.
Just watching The Shining and looking outside, and 2 deer are just fighting. And you're like, I don't know where I am right now. Like, this is very weird.
Just very, very weird. And then above our property, a lot of hunters used to kind of do their thing. And there was a few times where like I'd be home alone, and then all of a sudden I like heard the sound of voices, and I look out that window, and like one time I saw like these 5 big dudes dragging a dead deer across my lawn.
Oh my God.
And so I called my mom, and I'm like, Mom, there's men outside, and they've got deer,
and they've got guns.
They've got guns.
And they've got guns.
And my horror brain always goes to a very paranoid. I always kind of catastrophize, situations. Mm-hmm. And so seeing the strangers, and just seeing these people outside who you don't know and they don't belong there and they're trespassing, it really hit home, especially coming from like someone that lived completely remote and like, literally isolated by a bridge, where there's this fear of like, there's no one else. Like, these people could easily come in and invade my house, and like, there's no next door neighbor that would, kind of be there to help you.
Right.
And then shortly, I don't remember if it was before or after that, but then I saw Paranormal Activity in the theaters, and that movie really, that movie and Blair Witch Project, actually, I'm overlooking Blair Witch Project, but those two were like also very fundamental.
Zach, we are very, very similar in our fundamental building block horror movies. Very,
awesome.
very, very, very similar. Because The Strangers and the Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity are like quintessential texts for who I am the way I am.
That's awesome. Can I ask, when both of you saw Blair Witch, did you see it in the theaters like when it initially came out?
I saw it in the theaters when it initially came out, and I had just seen the sci-fi doc, and I'm using quotes for those that can't see, that I thought was real, and I had a terrible time in the movie theater because I thought the movie was real.
It was, obviously it's, at this point it's like, a lot of people have said this, but it's unlike, anything that kind of came before it, in terms of like just really bamboozling the audience into thinking like, these people are dead and we're actually watching
a snuff film.
A snuff film, yeah. And I know there's like a weird thing where some people are like, Blair Witch is overrated. Like, if you actually watch it now, it's not that. But I think that's all baloney.
Still scary.
It's still good.
It's still scary.
I agree with you. It's one of my favorites, and Paranormal Activity as well. Like, I thought that movie just got me.
That movie fucked me up. That movie fucked me. I couldn't sleep. Like, so I saw. So the Blair Witch came out in 99. I'm a little bit younger, so I couldn't have seen it. I didn't see it in theaters because my dad's a psycho, but not that much of a psycho. So I saw it at home, knowing that it was fake, and it still scared the shit out of me. What was that, awesome. Terry? Was that the Blair Witch?
No, it might have been.
I heard something. I was like, the Blair Witch is here.
I don't know where. What that
my God!
So, it was Phantom Creek.
But the Blair, I mean, like, obviously, I love the Blair Witch Project. But like, yeah.
That's a great tattoo of the. What is that?
It's the stick figure.
Stick figure.
Yeah.
It still scared the shit, and it still scares me. Like, that movie still scares me. I cannot watch it with other people if they're going to talk, though, because they make fun of it, and I get pissed. That happened to me one time in high school where I almost got into a fight with my friend because they were making fun of it, because that's how they process their fear. Like, that's how they were, like, processing it whenever we were in high school, but I was like, if you don't shut the fuck up, you're going to ruin one of my favorite horror movies for me.
Are you one of the types of people that, like, watches a movie and, like, is kind of, like, looking over at the other person to see if they're engaged, or are you, like...
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, 100%.
Yeah.
And, like,
me too.
To be fair, I'm not always that militant about not talking during horror movies, but they were being very mean to the Blair Witch Project, and it was not very fair.
Yeah. You have to respect that movie. I mean, every time I watch that movie, it gets really actually pretty like sad and harrowing.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they're lost, and she's just like screaming so primally, and like it just gives me chills. Like she's incredible in it. And then Paranormal Activity I just find like so spooky, and I love the world of that, and like I love most of those sequels, and anytime there's a sequel to that franchise, I'm totally down to like, all right. Mm-hmm. I actually like part 2, I remember just thinking was so genius, because is that the one that's like an interquel where it's like both a sequel but a prequel, or happening at this?
It's the one going at the same time with her sister. Her sister has the baby, and it's like they have like the titles, and like Katie shows up sometimes in the second one. So it's like they're kind of going on they're going on simultaneously, and then they end, like the second one ends like right after the first stuff ends because Katie comes and takes the baby.
I know. And then I just saw it turned out to be fake news, but there was a plot for an 8th movie that got leaked somewhere, and I was like, oh, this actually sounds interesting, but then it turned out to not be a real movie. So boo.
You obviously watched a lot of horror movies with your dad, but were you easily scared, and were you scared of these movies as a kid?
Oh yeah. Okay. Definitely. Yeah. Like I was asking my dad about that, a few weeks ago, and he was saying like, yeah, you would have your peer through your fingers as you were watching it. And, when I was in middle school, I probably had this thing that many people have where you're sitting at the lunch table and you're with a friend who has already seen like every horror movie, in this case, Friday the 13th. And they're describing the movie to you in vivid detail and like going through like all of the kills and all of this. And you're like, oh my God, like this movie sounds like so scary. I don't know if I'll ever be able to handle this. So I would eventually kind of convince my dad, like, yeah, let me rent this movie. I want to see, Friday the 13th. And the first time I watched Friday the 13th, he was in the other room, like balancing a checkbook. And the anticipation of knowing what all my friends had told me were these scary scenes that were going to happen, I made it to like the hitchhiker gets in the car in the very beginning of the first one, and she makes a run for it, and the killer, kind of tracks her down to this tree, and then pulls her head back and slits her throat. And I was just like yelling, and my dad was in the kitchen, stood up from the checkbook and like ran to the TV and like paused the VHS and was like, all right, you're not watching this. And then returned it to Doc's Video at the time. And so that was, I didn't make it through Friday the 13th the first time I watched it. I had to re-rent it a few months later. The hilarious thing is I watched it that time and I got to the end and I was like, the kids who described these kills were completely full of shit because none of these kills actually happened. and I was like, I mean, in my head, what they were describing was almost more fucked up and, had me questioning like what was going on with them, but, so.
Wow.
You mentioned some of like the movies that, you saw a little bit later, but do you still get scared of horror movies now? After all these years and making your own movies?
Yeah, of course. Obviously there's a lot of movies that like make you like tense and, just kind of on the edge of your seat. But recently I had the pleasure of seeing X with my wife in the theater, and we were just like, so, I don't know, that movie worked on us. Just all of the scares were really kind of top notch, and it was just a thrilling, like I was very uncomfortable that movie just because, usually as like a horror writer director, I can kind of like be like, okay, I know this guy's dead and it's going to be killed this way, or I know certain beats are coming up ahead. But that movie just kind of like, I went into it totally uncynical, and it kind of swept me up, and
yeah, I
was really messed up by it. And then this isn't a movie, but Squid Game really terrified me.
Oh, I couldn't finish Squid Game because it made me too depressed, so I still haven't finished it. Because I watched the first episode with my fiance and was like, I don't know if I'm in the mood for this. Like, this is like too much for me. Like, anything about like the disgusting capitalist machine. It's just so, like, obviously Squid Game is not real, but it's so real in its like where its basis that it's just very difficult for me to like turn off my brain and not get paranoid and sad about the world.
No, I mean, I totally hear that. And like the theme is one thing, but I'm like I have these nightmares of like, I don't know if you guys ever had this where you're being thrown into like a Hunger Games situation and you have to like survive, or it's like a Saw situation. And it's like, what would you do in like, if you were in this room, like how would you get out of it? And those kind of situations always just, they wake me up with a cold sweat. I'm like, ugh.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've worked on.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Den first, because I
Yay.
want the Den first. For our listeners who have not heard me talk about the Den ad nauseum, can you let listeners know what the Den is?
Yeah. So it's a found footage movie that takes place all on the desktop computer of the hero, Elizabeth Benton, who is a graduate student doing a thesis on the internet habits of people who are using this website called The Den, which is basically a version of chat roulette. And while she's doing her thesis, she comes across what she realizes is a brutal murder. And she takes it to the cops, tries to, figure out how to solve and get justice for this person. But in doing so, she's now made herself a target, and her friends and family, by the very same people who killed this other poor soul. And that's the movie.
Sure fucking is. Okay, so you made, if not the first screen life, whatever we want to call it, film. You made one of the first ones. How did you kind of conceptualize of this and then start going down that rabbit hole? Because I mean, there wasn't an Unfriended for you to base off of. Like, you were one of the first. So kind of how did that process go for you in designing this film?
Well, the genesis of it came from, at the time, my writing partner and girlfriend had taken this really odd job working for this feature on Facebook called Chat Rounds. I don't know if it's still there, but basically her job was to just log all of the conversations with the random users. It was basically like chat roulette. So she would, go on for an hour a night and just, have all these weird interactions. And most of these interactions are kind of in the movie are kind of based on, some of the people that she saw. And,
wow.
I would often kind of sit in and just, look over her shoulder and kind of watch the weirdness that she was bearing witness to. And we just started to realize, as we were looking at the laptop, that we saw this could be the actual, layout of a movie. I would watch this. I would watch just you on a Skype screen, talking to, the first thing that really creeped us out was there was this avatar, that became the inspiration for the first kill, where it was this screenshot of a random girl. It was kind of fuzzy, very blurry. And this person was texting with, or, DMing with us through the site. And we were like, this looks like it's a young woman, but it very well might not be. And,
right.
We don't know what the intentions are here. So that became the seed for just the initial kind of creep factor. And then it all kind of blossomed out from there. Just in terms of we'll make kind of a version of Rear Window here, where she witnesses this murder. And then let's just bring in all of her friends and her family, and we'll set the whole thing on the damn computer screen. And, it was cool. Yeah. And, convincing, when I brought the movie to the investors and the producers, there was definitely this big, fear of would anyone want to watch this? What's this going to look like? Can you sustain a movie for this X amount of time and just have it be interesting? So I had to do all of these kind of low budget, mock-up tests, and kind of had other people that I knew that were graphic designers just, kind of build me small versions of what the site would be. Right. And it's funny because a lot of these movies that have subsequently come after The Den, I've noticed are either, they take place on Skype or Zoom or real websites. And early on in the process, we were we didn't know if we'd have the rights to use those sites. So we didn't know if we'd get sued and the movie would never get released. So it kind of, just the idea of making up a website became this thing that's part of the movie's charm, but also this weird thing where it's the den doesn't exist. So there's like a buy-in at the beginning of the movie that people have to take. But we were able to kind of base it off of like similar enough other websites. So I think people, could get on board with the concept. Early enough, but
it's scary as shit. So I feel like
it really is.
I mean, I feel like you have a lot of intensity and violence, and it's pretty intense movie. I mean, it doesn't pull any punches, that's for sure. So I think that helped. I think definitely gets you sucked in.
It's funny because like I'm not like a very dark, macabre person, and my wife's family is always like, where does this come from? I'm not like a sick, sadistic, dude, but just that movie, I was able to kind of foster all of the ideas that I wanted to do at the time. It was one of the most just invigorating period because I made that movie with friends. The DP lived with me the whole month that we were making it. We shot it in an editor's house. It was. It was a family, kind of like the movie that I'm bringing you today. It was just this small little movie, like made by other people that like to make movies, and it was the little movie that could, I guess.
Yeah. So I have two questions. One, and the second one is very important, but the first one, did you shoot all of the den kind of content, or how did you come up with all the stuff that she would see, the random people that she would come across?
So half of them are based on inspiration from real people that we had seen on, just kind of scouring these sites. And then at another point, like the producer was like, let's just come up with like really wild stuff. Like, what if you see like a grandma just shove a pie in someone's face? That never made the movie, but that kind of thinking of like, let's almost like really put our comedy hats on here. And in some ways, there are moments in the first half of the movie that like I want to feel as like silly, ridiculous, and bizarre and absurd. There's definitely a penis puppet that makes a cameo.
That's my second question. Where did that come from, and do you still have it?
So that was a guy who I forget if we might have brought him on to be like another random, and then like that's what we called all of the characters that weren't making, like they were called randoms. And I think at some point he was like he did a scene, and then he was like, yeah, I got this penis puppet, or we happened to like look into the back of his car, and we saw that. We're like, what's that? Like, what's to do with that? And then he, kind of, pulled it out, and then it's this giant, like, it's literally, if you see the movie, it's a puppet that looks like almost like a Jim Henson puppet that he manipulates, and it has a face, and it's a singing, talking puppet. And we might have overused it, but we were having so much fun.
You did not overuse it. Every time I watch the movie, it always brings a smile to my face because it's so ridiculous.
There's a part, it's almost like she's just in a well of despair, like 60 minutes into the movie. No one believes her. She's lost the grant, and I think her boyfriend has gone missing, and she gets trolled by this one guy who then, like Rickrolls her with the penis puppet, and it's like one of my favoritely timed just moments of levity.
It's incredible. But you're also working on an audio thriller, which is called Uncomfortably Numb. Can you also tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes. So this is in many ways a spiritual sequel to The Den. It is about an internet content moderator who works for this third-party app that kind of goes through cleaning and removing all of the terrible stuff that you see on all of the big social media apps. And in doing so, he's become very detached and numb. And one of these nights that he's doing this shift, he sees something that completely snaps him out of this malaise. He sees his estranged ex-girlfriend getting murdered. Oh. And from there, he basically goes on this investigation to find out, is this real? What happened? And goes down a rabbit hole. And in many ways, since making The Den, I've had many moments where I've, kind of toyed with the idea of making a sequel. And this isn't exactly a, Den universe sequel, but it has so many of the germs of ideas that have kind of come in, since that time. And, in between the time that I made The Den and wrote this, I worked for Snap for a while as a content moderator. And
wait, are you serious? You worked for Snapchat?
I did.
So did I.
Oh wow, that's funny.
I managed Nat Geo's Snapchat Discover channel. I worked there for a while.
Oh, wow.
And, managed content and published it.
My job was similar to that, where it was the the Snap Map. Yeah. So Snap Map, where you basically can go on and see what your friends in different cities are doing when they post snaps. But my horror brain would always be like, okay, what if you just randomly clicked on a snap in just anywhere in the world? You have access to this on your phone, at least at the point that they released the Snap Map. Everyone had access to this, where you could just search through the world and you could see different heat patterns of where people were snapping.
Oh, wow.
And you could just see a snap from some dude in his bedroom, like you're brandishing a gun or something, and you'd be like, whoa, that's weird.
Wow.
And,
whoa.
Yeah, just really, fascinating that you were at this point able to just peer into whoever published it to the map. It was out there. So a lot of those ideas kind of got filtered into this new concept that I'm working on Uncomfortably Numb. So Uncomfortably Numb is essentially a audio series, much like an audiobook, but it has sound design underneath it. So for scenes that are, thrilling, you'll hear the Foley and knife stabs and all of that. And then it has this score underneath it that really kind of, I love audiobooks, but, sometimes when you add the score underneath it, it almost helps switch the setting or if you need to shift gears a little bit from a really tense moment to suddenly okay, now this is just a downbeat. It kind of holds the audience's hand just a little bit. And so I've written 6 chapters for this, and it's a trial show. So the more people that find it, the more episodes that I get to do, hopefully. The weird thing is that the show is on an app called Pocket FM, and you have to download it. And when people go and download it, they're probably going to notice most of the content on there is these romance novels that are either
I downloaded the app, and I listened to the first episode, but I downloaded the app, and it wants you to pick 3 favorite things, and I'm like, this is all romance.
It's all romance, and it's a very specific type of romance where half of it is werewolf. People in love with werewolves, and then the other half is
fuck you.
And then the other half is so I married a billionaire, or all these kind of billionaire romances. So the idea was, they wanted to kind of build out their genre slate, and they approached me to write the show, and it's a gamble because the audience that is on that app right now might not necessarily want anything else, and the people that I want to listen to it might not want romance. But hopefully, you hear this, you're a fan, and you take a chance and you check out the show, and once you checked it out, if the app is bugging you, you can delete it.
Exactly. Yeah, and you just have to pick. Yeah. You just have to pick 3 choices, and you can get into to find Uncomfortably Numb, because I had to do that. I was like, I guess I'm just going to randomly choose.
Yeah, the barrier for
werewolves, Bigfoot.
Unfortunately, werewolves was not an option for me.
Go back.
It was all a bunch of the billionaires type stuff was all the ones they had up there. It's like, okay, whatever.
So many billionaires. Yeah.
Recommend all of this horniness to me. That's fine. I just want to listen to the podcast or the audio show.
Yeah. It's absurd.
Okay. So Zach, we have talked about the Den. We have talked about your horror history. We have talked about your audio show. But what film did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Today I brought the 1962 classic Carnival of Souls by
Hell yeah.
by Herc Harvey.
Herc Harvey.
What a good name, by the way.
Yeah.
What a name.
What a name.
So before we dive in, I will give a quick synopsis of Carnival of Souls. After a traumatic accident, a woman becomes drawn to a mysterious abandoned carnival.
That is like the most basic plot synopsis from IMDb, because that does not cover...
Wait, is that really it?
That's it. That is what IMDb says this movie is about.
I
love it.
I've heard so many other episodes, Mary Beth, where you've had so much more to read there.
That is literally
we got short and sweet today. Oh no, we don't write these ourselves because that requires time and brain power that I unfortunately do not have.
No.
We're relying on the kindness of IMDb, and sometimes it is a joy.
Yeah.
All right, but take us back to the very beginning. When did you see this movie? How old were you? How did you see it? Why is this your Scarred for Life pick? Give us your horror story.
So yeah, this kind of ties into, initially what I was talking about with growing up with my dad and him showing me a lot of weird movies. Probably when I was 5, he was a fan of this. You would call it like a movie subscription magazine called Sinister Cinema.
Okay.
And at the time, this was like a catalog for all these great movies from the 60s and 70s that were drive-in movies.
Okay.
That, at the time, obviously there was no streaming, and it was kind of the dawn of VHS and getting those transfers. So these movies weren't very widely accessible, and the transfers that you would get would be just, someone would randomly track down an old print, and then it wouldn't be these like 4K remasters that we have today. Like, we're so lucky.
Yeah.
So he tracked down a copy of Carnival of Souls, and it was just one of those nights where, I couldn't go to bed, and, he was watching a movie, and we just put it on. And that movie to me is just, it's this surrealistic nightmare, but also this kind of warm blanket to me. Like, it puts me in this like bizarre trance when I watch it. Every year I have to watch it on Halloween late at night with the lights off. It's a staple. It's always in the rotation. But I think, what scarred me the most is that the man, played by Herc Harvey,
played by the director himself. Yeah.
And just something about, the pale makeup he had, the black eyeshadow, like the whatever makeup he had under his eyes, and just how his hair was just kind of unkempt and like really styled in a just interesting way. I, at that point, had never seen scares where there's a guy looking in a window at you, or someone creepily from a distance just watching you. And that movie has so many of these great moments where, this man, this ghoul, will kind of walk into a room, slowly turn his head towards camera, and just his expression and the emptiness in his eyes.
That smile.
That smile that he occasionally, will do. All of that stuff just left a mark on me from go. And not only that, just the setting, like the carnival, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah, the Saltaire Pavilion, just that location and how it was filmed, and seeing it from a distance at night in silhouette, like that to me is like, especially as a kid, you see that and you're just like, that's a nightmare place. That's a place that I don't want to go to. And, the fact that the character wanders through it at numerous points and is just kind of going into this just really creepy ghost town that you feel like at one point was alive and now is just this empty husk. like all of that just kind of just worked for me. And I just, it's one of my all-time favorites. And I'm so happy that no one else brought it to you guys. Because I just love talking about it.
Yeah. So, do you remember how old you were when you saw it?
Yeah, I was probably 5. Because
wow.
Yeah, probably 5.
There's a lot going on in this movie that a 5-year-old would not understand.
Yes,
that's most horror movies, but wow.
Well, and that's a lot of the stuff that that we can dive into today. But as a kid, all of what we'll talk about, just completely went over me and just. As a kid, you're just watching it. You're creeped out by the organ.
Yeah.
You're creeped out by the man and the location, and that's enough. It's only in watching it, over the years that you can kind of peel back. Oh wow, like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here besides just the atmospherics.
Oh,
yeah.
I gotta ask about the ending. Did that surprise you as a kid? Because like nowadays, like the twist ending, she was dead the whole time or something like that is kind of a trope. But at the time when this came out, I'm not sure if that was. I can't remember a movie prior to that where that was like a twist.
Yeah, and I think it really upset me. You're always rooting for hopefully you're always rooting for the protagonist to get away. And when they don't, it's always kind of tragic. I kind of like prepping to talk about it. I saw that there's a Twilight Zone episode called The Hitcher and Ambrose Bierce's The Occurrence at Owl Creek. Both of those also do the gimmick of like she was dead the whole time.
Okay.
But one thing that I actually picked up this time around while I was watching it that kind of stuck with me was I'm aware that this movie does have kind of like that. It ends with a like, gotcha, like she was dead the whole time. But a scene before that is this moment where the cops and the priest and the doctor are at the carnival and they have found Mary Henry, the main character's, the shape of her remains in the sand. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that they're there and that they're talking about and that they're investigating this, that adds an extra dimension to me that complicates the ending that she was dead the whole time in the car. And it actually kind of elevates it for me because it means that she actually existed for these characters to know. She actually had these interactions with all of them. It's not like a dream that she had. She was real somehow. Like either there was a phantom version of her that was inhabiting this town in Utah, but somehow she actually existed. And I think that really, that helps the ending for me because it widens it. It makes it more mysterious.
Yeah.
So this was the first time I had seen this movie. Mm-hmm. It was like one of those movies that was on my list. I have to see it as a horror fan. I need to see it. And, your list gets huge. So I was so glad that you wanted to watch this because I was like, fucking finally, I have a reason to watch this movie. I can force myself to watch it. So I didn't really know anything about this movie. I knew she got into a car accident and there was a carnival. And so I didn't look into it at all because I was like, this is a rare moment where I can go in relatively blind and like not really know what's going on. And I'm so glad I did. I will say the first note I wrote is she dead though? After like I did clock that, but again because we're so used to it, it's like we're so used to that. But that also left my mind though. I will say I wrote that down and then watched the whole movie. Like, oh, she's not dead, and then she was. I was like, fuck you, movie, you got me. God damn it, you got me.
Yeah.
This movie is absolutely incredible, but I think one of the things that I was so impressed with was how this movie is like liminal space incarnate in a way I have not seen in old movies. And how this movie is both old and contemporary in the weirdest way. Like, the ghosts look like I was like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, because they're the only reason you can tell they're ghosts because they have the dark kind of shadow under their eyes and they're pale, but it's still but in this instance it's still so creepy because it's so uncanny. But then you have this organ score that feels like something you hear in a movie today. I'm gonna say I was like, this is giving me like indie horror, like creepy vibes that you would see today. So there was this really interesting tension between like old and contemporary and like almost futuristic from the 60s. And it creates this weird liminal space vibe that we were just talking about the ending. It makes me think this could be like such an interesting case for an interdimensional cosmic horror. I know that's like very much a stretch, but there is that vibe to it where it's like she obviously existed in some other plane of existence or in some fashion. Like maybe she's a ghost, or maybe it's like she somehow did that dimension swapping thing that we see in horror movies. And it's just like the way this movie captures these unsettling, something isn't right, you don't feel comfortable vibe the entire movie. In every interaction is just soaked with like something bad is about to happen.
Well, and it's wow. I completely agree with you. Yeah. And I think that's helped because I think she was one of the only classically trained actors. Yeah. And all of the rest of the cast isn't like on her level. So there's this, you're right. There's this interesting tension at play where they don't all kind of feel on the same plane, but it works and adds to the creepiness. She feels like an outsider.
She does, absolutely. Because I think the only other person that had like acting experience at that time was Sidney Berger, who plays John Linden. He was going to school at the time. I think I read somewhere that he was actually at school at Kansas City learning to be an actor.
Yeah, and he's actually quite good in the movie.
He's really good in this movie. He definitely is creepy, but like that kind of like there's the banter between them. In one part, I'm like, this seems like the very kind of banter that today we're like, get back, this is creepy. But at the time seemed like natural. In a way, if that makes sense, like the way that he's like constantly chasing her and not taking no for an answer. Today we'd be like, okay, this is bad. You need to where's a bystander? Stop this intervention. But back at that time, when this was filmed, it almost seemed like that's what they do. Guys are going to chase the girl and they're going to say no. And you're like, oh, I'm going to keep whittling you down. That seemed to be like a classic trope. So he has this sort of like, if you were to isolate it from that time frame, the typical kind of, I know this is the woman for me type of guy, but then also he's plying her with alcohol and he's doing all these things that is constantly trying to break her down, that it just becomes so incredibly unsettling that he's just as creepy as the reflection of the old man that she keeps seeing.
Every band in this movie is the fucking worst. And well, besides the old, like, there's obviously the two women she's in the car with at the beginning, and then her landlady, but everyone else is a man that she interacts with. And the landlady is an interesting kind of foil to, like, old-fashioned women, and how women, and I think it's relevant today, like, women can be just as bad as men. But, like, fuck, I was, like, listing out, like, the men challenging the women to the drag race at the fucking beginning, being like, let's race. The men commenting on Mary's employment about like, oh, you're going to be a nun? Oh, God. And like, there's the fucking neighbor that is just bothering her, like, all the time. Like, hey, you want to get dinner? No. Well, why don't I come in and do this? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, thanks for making me feel unsafe in my own goddamn house. There's the man at the water fountain that's like, I didn't mean to scare you. And then there's the therapist. I mean, I listed it all out. Like, the list goes on of her just... Yes!
He does
like, I'll do therapy. He grabs her like, I'll go to my office right now and do therapy. I'm like, is that how you found a therapist in the 1960s?
Well, he even says, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a doctor. And he's like, but I'm gonna diagnose you, you hysterical woman, like shaking your snap out of it. It's like, good Lord, the men in this are just horrible. But I did want to clock one thing about the landlady though, is that there's a moment where she is with Mary, and she's in Mary's room, and Mary's like telling her she sees the creepy man coming up the stairs, like that he's out there, and she even gets into the landlady's mind, so you can almost see her kind of all of a sudden not feeling safe and being in Mary's shoes, because she like kind of peers out into the hallway like ready for someone to come lunge at her, and of course he's not there. But like there's that moment where it's like actual pathos between the two of them, where like all of her authority of being the landlady is stripped away, and she's just as defenseless as Mary is.
Yeah, that's a great moment.
I also wanted to bring up a line that the therapy moment, I think, made me think this movie is like vaguely queer. And I'm not sure if anyone else had this reading a little bit, but there's a part where he's like, well, don't you have a boyfriend? And she's like, what did she say? I have no desire for the close company of other people.
Yep.
And while that could just be her being lonely, like just not wanting other people. I read that either as queer or as asexuality, as like she's very openly defiant to the idea of settling down, finding a partner, and like outright rejecting intimacy, like any kind of intimacy, not just to a man who has like isn't obviously advanced, like putting on advances towards her, but just when she's asked, she's like, I don't want that at all, which in the 1960s is incredibly big to have a woman saying that, like on camera, very much being like, I don't want the company of men, I don't want company of other people, I'm fine being alone. And because I'm queer and think everything is queer, I was like, she's gay! And that was their way of saying she's gay. And I was like, I will, and it's like my favorite instance of us queers trying to find like little bitty bits of representation. But like, you can't, when someone is that explicit, you cannot help but like especially now, read into that, like that moment so deeply.
No, I think that's
Terry, I don't know if you read that either, because I know that you and I look at the queer shit a lot, so I'm curious if you thought about that at all.
I actually was thinking she was asexual, you know, like arrow A's.
I was queer asexual. Yeah.
Because like she makes that, I mean, in a very simplistic way, right? Because again, I don't think this movie necessarily has the sort of language that when we talk about the different identities now, but her thing, I don't seem capable of being close to people, which you could read as being like that sort of, she is outside of the society in terms of post-accident, because we don't really know anything about her pre-accident. We don't know if she was vivacious and, you know, sexually forward. We don't know any of that kind of information about her. All we see is everything post that accident. So I'm, you know, you could easily take it as just being like on the front, you know, that it's a clue that, you know, she's dead, or that she is stuck out of time, or that she is, you know, not belonging in this reality anymore. But yes, Mary Beth, I definitely clocked that as being like this is like a moment that people could dig into as a queer reading.
I even like that line. I forget who she's talking to, but she's like, "I'm not afraid of men," and I think that's such a cool line in that movie. And I love her character too, because she is like never really like that afraid of the man, the ghoul who's coming after her, and at times she's almost kind of compelled to go there and prefers that world more than the world that she inhabits on a daily basis. Like when she goes for the first time and breaks into the carnival, I think the next day she's like the most animated that we've seen her in the movie, as if like this thing like suddenly brought her joy. And there's another moment that I thought was really interesting later when she's playing the organ later in the movie, and she becomes possessed, and she starts to have these visions of the dancing ghouls in the pavilion. And then the minister is like, profane, like this, how do you know souls?
But that moment's so fucking cool too. Like when she's playing it's like she gets possessed and it's like you just get these shots of like the robes kind of like moving in the breeze, a shot out the window, like these creepy moments, and it all kind of devolves, and then he grabs her hands and it's the priest.
Profane,
and it's just like,
sacrilege, what are you playing in this church?
But what I like is
so good.
Well, she's then fired, and then hilariously, as she walks out the door, he's like still trying to proselytize her. He's like, "Hey, but you know, if you ever want to come back to the church, you're always welcome.
There is help here. I urge you to accept it."
But then
she's like, "Pick a lane, buddy."
But then after that, she goes to the dance hall with Mr. Linden, and I never noticed it before, but almost like 2 minutes before, she was kind of smiling as she's like seeing this vision of the dancing ghouls. And now you have this shot of her next to Mr. Linden, and she's just staring into her drink, and you've got people dancing behind her, and she doesn't even like want to dance, but like you almost wondered, would she rather be dancing with the dead? And at that point in the movie, she's still like not really sure if that's what she wants. At least that's the takeaway that I brought out of it this time. But I just think I could definitely see a queer reading of her in this version.
This movie fucking rules.
It really does. And what surprised me about it is there's a number of things that surprised me about it. It has like a very workman like feel to the actual shooting of it for the most part, but there are moments of like pure brilliance that I just
Style.
like it.
Yeah.
Yes, that like pull me back, because it's very much like a shot on shot. You know, it has all these scenes, and it just feels like this is where the camera's placed. But then there's a moment early on that, like, going back to what you were saying, Mary Beth, about the liminal spaces that like really worked for me, and it's when she's at the gas station and she's like, "Where's the boarding place?" And he points, the camera swerves to see where it's pointing into the inky blackness. And then we realize that we're now in front of the door as she's opening up into her room. And I'm like, that is such a brilliant shot. And it definitely it feeds into that. That's when I first took a note about the liminal spaces, because it's like, this movie is just full of those spaces, that even places that feel like they're self-contained, there's like another realm on the other side of it, whether it's the old man kind of creepily peering in from like the other realm almost into the window. There's the use of reflections a lot, but then also the way that the camera shoots, where everything is constantly feeding into the next scene as if there is no place here.
Yeah.
It's all just continuations.
It's like a dream. Yeah.
Yes, well, there's that moment, and the part that really got me was the dressing room sequence, where she's like she's trying on the dress, and she goes into the dressing room. I want there to be more dressing room horror, is what this movie also made me realize, because dressing rooms really are like, malls and dressing rooms are like quintessential liminal spaces for me. I think they're so bizarre, they're so weird. But there's a moment where the camera like pans up, and there's this weird like watery effect, and then it pans back down, and it's like, holy shit, like, we just transitioned into a whole, and like, everything's silent.
Everything is
like,
silent.
That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Just like this so simple but so effective way of just showing that we're somewhere different. Either she's dissociating, or we've gone to another place where she's dead. Like, wherever we are, it's bizarre. And it's such a, they didn't even have to indicate that, but I love that really brief kind of moment of something weird happening in
the
this
vertigo
dressing
effect.
room.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's so gorgeous, and these really, it seems so simple, but really important visual choices to set the tone of where she is in space. Like, even if you don't actually know, it's like such an interesting marker of time and place in this movie, which is so cool.
And off of that, like, not only visual, but like auditory, you know, that whole scene that you talked about with the dressing room, all the sound gets stripped away.
Yeah.
And you just hear her feet, her footsteps.
Oh, the clacking. Yes.
The clacking. It's almost more unsettling. I think it's in that moment, or the later moment when it happens, but she goes outside and she sees a jackhammer. Like,
yes, it's that same sequence.
And the soundless jackhammer is just really unsettling, and you know, he plays with just sound in such a brilliant, unnerving way, and not only that, but like, talking about the score and the organ, two things that I noticed this time. Some of the time, the organ music feels like it's diegetic sound in that it's like, this is coming from the radio, or she's actually playing the organ here. But then there are moments where it doesn't actually feel like, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it works for me, even if it's a mistake or whatever. But there are moments where you kind of feel like the music isn't diegetic and it's score again. And that kind of weird blending, even in like the moment when she's driving the first time and she's going to Utah, she's messing around with the radio, and you hear the organ music is on every channel. And then it feels like either she turns the radio off or whatnot, but that organ just suddenly takes over, and it feels now like, is this actually what she's hearing, or is this the score? It creates this like weird, unsettling effect. And the moment where she's playing the organ later and she becomes possessed, I had like a revelation this time, and I was like, whoa, I might sound like a total basic, you know, like you might be like, oh yeah, that was obviously it. But the fact that she is a church organist and is playing the organ, and in that scene, it suddenly segues into the carnival shots. And then I realized, like, oh my God, calliope music, like organs are also a part of carnivals.
Yes.
And it's this like kind of crazy like juxtaposition of like, was she a church organist, but also in the undead world, will she have a job as a calliope organist for their weird Carnival of Souls, you know? Like that was, I wasn't high, but that was the
well, I hadn't even thought about that, how, you know, this movie does play with like religion and secular.
Yes.
That seems to be this huge pull. And I think a carnival, which, you know, has like all the type of similar music sometimes as the kind of organ music, as well as in a church. Like I can see that kind of connection there. One thing that like jumped out at me a whole lot is this obsession with the soul in this movie.
Yeah.
Because when she's playing with that gorgeous organ before she gets to Utah, where she's, you know, planning on going to Utah, and there's the room full of like pipes and everything. I'm like, that is a gorgeous fucking organ. But she's playing it and everyone's like, oh yeah, you know, you got to put some soul into it. And she shows up in Utah and the minister's like, we have an organist that puts soul into it. Like there's this obsession with this idea of soul. And then the moment when she starts to play non-religious music and kind of it takes on that sinister timbre is when the minister's like, you have no soul. And it's like this idea of mixed with like this idea of like the afterlife, whether, you know, she is somehow escaped death and has been, you know, haunted by this figure that's trying to remind her that she is dead, or however you want to take it, as like a purgatorial place that she is stuck in, or whether it's people, the undead trying to make her remember that she is dead and bring her back to whatever is going to exist in the afterlife. There's that obsession with her soul and whether she has it or does not have it that I was very fascinating to watch in this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of credit should be given to the screenwriter, John Clifford, I think his name was. But, you know, I think he wrote it in 3 weeks. He worked with Herc Harvey at Centron Films, Centron Group, which was like they made educational
They
movies.
sure did, as well as like almost like propaganda films. Like my favorite was like, what about juvenile delinquency? And some of these shorts are up on YouTube because I watched them today, I wanted to see what some of the shorts were. And they are basically like, one of them is almost basically the opening of this film where people are drag racing. Like it is definitely, you can see where he got this idea of like these kids doing something bad and look what happens. The first thing that happens, you break the law, you go off the bridge and you die. And that is basically the intent of a lot of the non-educational ones that he did. There was that one. There was one about What About Drinking, which is another one on YouTube that I watched, where there's this scientist and he is talking about people drinking, and he's like talking about test subjects, and the movie switches between 3 rats that he has made, one that has not had any alcohol, one that's had some alcohol, and that's equivalent to a couple drinks in a person, and another one that is completely blotto. While we're also talking about these 3 teenagers, one who is abstaining from alcohol, one who's had a couple drinks, and one who is completely blotto. And the scientist is like putting the mice up on this like balancing bar and showing that the one that hasn't drunk is able to keep his balance on it, while the other ones are just like flailing all over the place. While we're also seeing these people decide to go drunk driving. It's like, you see this part and you can see kind of the where that starts and where this movie continues.
That's incredible. I mean, I love this idea. I just love this idea of like a guy who's like making educational videos, but like, you know, in the back of his mind, he's got this like this really creative way to attack these, you know, and
I mean, they looked good too. The videos, that like the editing in it, like it's a really well produced video. It makes me laugh because it's like, it's a little heavy handed in its themes.
Wait, that's so funny though, to think that he made propaganda movies like that, and watching this movie, and it's very much like, I feel like it's very much like Men Are Fucking Gross movie. And I just think it's very, I know obviously all different subjects, but it's so interesting to think that that's the kind of movies that he had worked on, and then he makes this movie that's a lot. I think a big part of this movie is, hey, men fucking can be really gross, and women, what's worse, death or men? Like, that's not what the movie is trying to say. But sometimes part of this, like, a lot of this movie to me was like, oh my god, I would rather, like, these men are worse than death. Anyway.
What's so interesting is, like, I feel like there's a totally more commercial version of this movie where Mr. Linden is like a Cary Grant, you know, and he's sensitive and he's like, oh my God, like we're going to get to the bottom of this. But what an interesting choice to not have a love story. And in the only possible love story you have, it's a creep who, when you first introduce him, the shot is like filmed from behind his back, and he basically feels like Michael Myers.
Yeah,
you know, he's ogling
her as she's getting out of her robe, shimming out of her robe.
It's so like, what an interesting choice to not go the obvious route. And I'm so glad that they didn't do that. And I'm also glad that for the bad guy, you know, the man, he doesn't have a name. There's no real mythology. Like you could say like, okay, the mythology is he's dead and he's like the Grim Reaper. He comes for people that are in purgatory and brings them to the carnival, you know, but like beyond that, there's no like the man died in 1930 at the carnival when the carnival burned down. And now he's haunting the car. It's all up to your imagination.
And I was very much expecting like woman gets in car accident, wanders to carnival, ghosties everywhere, she must escape. Again, because I didn't know anything about this movie. So I was expecting a very like standard ghost story. But this was just like ahead of its time. Like this is something like this is my shit. Like this is a movie that I feel like is so similar to what is being made today and what people are trying to accomplish today. But I think that this accomplishes it so well. And like, I think that this movie is what so many horror movies want to be when they're a little bit more, I think, contemplative, a little bit more into like the like cerebral kind of ideas of horror. I think this movie is such a pinnacle of that. And 100%. It's definitely, I feel like a lot of movies, Terry, we've watched recently for the show have like shifted my thoughts about like the horror genre like as a whole, which is wild. It's really interesting to see what this movie I think has been for so many filmmakers, even if it's subconsciously.
Have you guys seen It Follows? I feel like that one has so much in common.
Just thinking that this movie has a lot to do. I thought a lot about It Follows too. Yeah. Again, that's a liminal space horror, but again, it definitely has like It Follows feels very much like it brings in a lot of Carnival of Souls influence.
Yeah, like the ghouls who are coming after her, who you don't know anything about. The score is kind of, you know, organ centric or keyboard centric, and even Micah Monroe's performance is kind of in that same space, you know?
You know, I was thinking about how I feel like this movie probably has inspired a lot of films. I know for a fact that George Romero credited it with Night of the Living Dead. I think you can see it both in like the ghoulish design of what he would eventually do in Night of the Living Dead. But like, I was watching this and the way it's filmed brought a lot of Night of the Living Dead homages to me. Like, obviously it came before, but like from my perspective, because this is my first time watching this too, but I just kept watching this thinking, this feels like Night of the Living Dead. Even from, you know, Mary, the actress that plays her, she reminded me a lot of Barbara in Night of the Living Dead. Like there's a lot of connections there as well, but also, I do think that I'm starting to go down. I'm not familiar with David Lynch's filmography, but I've started like watching some of his films, and I'm watching this and I'm like, I feel like the surrealism and the ambiguity in this, is kind of a forebear to what Lynch would be doing, about maybe a decade later.
Yeah. I think Lost Highway, draws a lot of inspiration from Carnival of Souls. And, you know, he loves this kind of dream surrealistic, state. Oh, we have to talk about Candice Hilligoss.
What a performance!
And you know, it's interesting because I mean, I'm just really curious so it's both of your first time watching it. That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, like you know, as a kid, you don't really observe too much from performances. I feel like you're just more like the actor, like is more of like a cipher for you, and you just kind of are along and you're scared for them. But as you grow up and become more observant, her performance to me over the years has definitely kind of matured. And this time I watched it, I was like, she's really good. Not just from the expressive eyes and, you know, her facial expressions, but some of her line deliveries are are
impeccable line delivery.
impeccable. Yeah.
Well, and I what I really liked, what really pulled me in is that she has a lot of agency. I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of films
Mhm.
with the kind of, I mean, you could take this as sort of like a woman in peril type thing, because
Mhm.
again, you have all these men telling her, you know, she's hysteric, that they're not believing anything that she sees. And that's a trope that we've seen back with Rebecca, you know, throughout the decades. That's not a new thing with this film, but she has so much agency in this movie that I was really taken aback by it. I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting her to basically drive the entire story.
She doesn't take shit from anybody.
No.
And I love, even like with Mr. Linden, you know, who's like so creepy. It's like there's that one moment where she chooses to be around him when she wants to, you know, like
Yep.
she's in control. You know, she can tell him no, but then there are other times where she's like, hey, you know what? I think I want his company right now. And then as soon as she's like kind of over his advances, then she's like, all right, get away from me, dude.
I love that, because like he even tells her, he's like, well, you know, yesterday you seemed kind of sort of cold, you know, and saying that basically this morning that she's not. And she's like, well, this morning I needed company.
Yeah.
Like I love the laissez-faire attitude of
It's
it.
on
'Cause
her terms. It's so cool.
It is.
Yeah.
Everything's on her terms.
It's
and I'm like, this
so
is fantastic.
Yeah, even her just driving the third act, it's not like she runs away from, you know, Salt Lake City. Like, I guess she like tries to, but like at a certain point she's like, you know what, I got to go to this carnival by myself and take care of this. It doesn't work, but she faces her fear at the end, and I think that's that. I give her a lot of credit as a hero, or as a protagonist.
I got a lot of Tippi Hedren vibes a
Mm.
little bit
Yeah.
from her, from The Birds. And The
Birds,
Birds
yes.
came out a year later.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting, because as soon as, like, especially the sequence where she's driving towards Salt Lake City and you have the reveal of the ghost guy, I got such interesting parallels between this movie and The Birds and these two characters. And I think while Tippi Hedren's character in The Birds is a little bit more outspoken and a little bit more direct, and I feel like Mary in this movie is a little bit more timid, they both are fighting for agency.
Yeah.
And a little bit more in this movie, I think, for sure. But I think it's such an interesting parallel between these two characters, and what, you know, they're leaving where they're comfortable and going somewhere new, and shit hits the fan. And yeah, it's not like a new thing in horror, but it's just kind of interesting with how closely they were at least seeing these parallels between these characters and how they handle the scenarios. And it's
Yeah.
just, it was cool. And she is so much more, I think, like, she's got a lot of interiority to her character. I think she portrays
a
this
lot.
kind of like inner struggle and turmoil with Mary really well, that makes her feel like she went through this trauma. Because, like, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole underlying thing in this is, hey, your friends died a horrific death and you crawled out of the car. Like, that's weird. And obviously you're moving away for probably that's a big reason. And I think that she captures that really well in making this really fascinating, complex character in a 1962 horror movie.
It's so complex. And like, even she, you know, she survives this horrific crash. Her two friends have died. And then literally the next day, she's got to kind of recover, you know. It's that weird question of like, is she burying her grief a little too much, or is she just like, I don't have time for this. Like, I just have to,
Yeah.
you know, I have to move on. That definitely struck me this time as like, you know, it's intense that she's just backing up and leaving.
Well, and even though she is a little bit more timid, I think, than maybe Tippi Hedren is, but she's not afraid to stand up for herself, which I think is, we see that from the very beginning, where, you know, she's again playing that organ and the guy's like, you know, talking about how, you know, she's going to go to the church, and she's like, no, it's just another business for me. This is going to pay my job. And even when she's talking to the minister, she stands up to him. He's like, no, I don't want a reception. It's going to make me uncomfortable. I don't want this. I don't want that. This is just a job. And she says that to anyone that asks her about like her religion. She's like, no, it's paying my bills.
Yeah. And
I love that, because you would typically see like the kind of meek, like, you know, even if maybe she didn't believe in it, she might be like, oh yeah, you're right. No, I might go do that, you know, kind of play it off. But no, she's just like, no, this is just me.
It's so cool. Yeah. I love it.
So do we have anything else we want to talk about before we wrap up and give us our rating out of 5?
I guess my last thing, I'm curious, what do you guys think is going on in this movie? Do you think she's in purgatory? Do you think she survived? What is your guys' reading of this film?
Well, my reading that I came up with literally at the beginning of this recording, because it finally all clicked for me, is that she somehow it's like a weird interdimensional thing. That is my current read, and while it sounds silly, I'm taking a more cosmic horror approach to this, and like somehow there's like some weird parallel shit going on where like she's retaining like obviously memories of what happened, and there's something reminding her, and some bigger force knows that she is somewhere she is not supposed to be, and it's kind of like reminding her over and over again. And then when her body is found, it kind of like the timelines kind of snap back into place a little bit. Is my reading of this movie.
I think that's great, because what I noticed this time around is that when she first comes out of the water, you never actually see her come out of the water. You just see her just kind of arrive. It's like she's just popped onto the sandbar. So you don't actually see her get out of the car or whatnot. So I actually think that reading, it all makes sense in a way. She's just popped into place there, but until you see the body, then the dream collapses.
Yeah.
So I kind of had a similar reading of it as well, because, well, the first thing that just popped in my head is because when we talked about Beetlejuice, we talked about how that movie was pulling from a lot of films, that there's a lot of little horror homages in there. And as I was thinking about this car going off and the people and her dying, and this idea is if she's dead or not, I mean, that's sort of the opening of Beetlejuice with, you know, the married couple going off the bridge, and then it takes them forever to realize that they're actually dead and they're ghosts and they're tethered to their house. But I was thinking about this, about like, I see this as a woman who has like some kind of, she hasn't met what she thinks is her potential. She had more to do. And so when she dies, something about her continued onward. And then she kept getting pulled back because of these haunting images of dead people reminding her, no, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. And then I think she kind of realizes at one point, why am I still here? Because all these people are terrible. And so then she does finally go embrace and go running to the carnival where she sees all of the people that are like her. And she finally, in a way, even though they chase her and it's like a horror movie set, she sees herself dancing with the ghoul. And it's almost like this acceptance. And then once she finally can't deal with it anymore and she realizes she doesn't belong here, that's when we cut back to them pulling the car out of the water.
I like both those readings. I think
it's just, I love movies that are just ambiguous.
Think,
yeah.
Yeah. You've seen it obviously way more times than we have. So
is it too diplomatic if I'm like, it's both of those versions?
Yes. Yes, it is.
No, I mean, I guess what I love about this movie is that every time I watch it, because it's not like a very on the outward surface, it's not a super complicated movie. And right. when I initially brought it to you guys, like, I was nervous because I was like, this isn't one of those movies that like is necessarily like, there's not a ton of plot, there's not a lot of craziness going on. It's a lot of it is just kind of, you're inferring, there's no there's barely any mythology, and it's very kind of stripped down. But what's so cool about it is there are these things that are conversations about life and religion and just all these terrible men, and, you know, this woman who's just trying to live her own life and go through it. I just love that a movie that seems so simple on the outside just has so much richness to it that we were able to have a nice discussion about it. And if we talk about it next year on Twitter, I'll have a completely new read of it. You know?
I mean, absolutely. But when I came into this conversation, I honestly was like, well, she's in purgatory, because the obsession with the soul and that kind of aspect of it is like, well, she's in purgatory. And then by the end of it, she has moved on to whatever comes next. But then when you had mentioned the part about like her laying on the beach at the very end and then the cops coming, I was thinking, well, how could this be like stuck in her mind or something like that, or be some purgatorial place if it continues after she's, you know, left this world? And I was like, so that's why I started thinking about all these other things that potentially good. So yeah, I think this movie like definitely begets that kind of conversation of what is really going on here. And that surprised me in and of itself.
Yeah.
I guess I get why it's in the Criterion Collection now.
Which, by the way, when I went to go rent this movie, I was going to go see if I had to rent it, and it was luckily on the HBO Max, so I didn't have to. But when I went to rip HBO Max, by the way, but anyway, that's another story. When I went to go look, there was 2 editions of it. There was the
colorized.
There was a colorized version of it. I'm like, why would you do that to this film? This film is drenched in shadows and darkness.
Whoa.
That's
Zucchini?
It's my kit. It's Misu.
Oh, Misu. Misu agrees.
My cat. So Zach, my cat. It's both of them, but it's usually the younger one. When she wants to leave her room and the door is shut, she hits the doorstop thing because she knows it gets
trained them.
either my or my fiance. Because my fiance is we're in an apartment, so we can hear it. So she knows that once he hears it, he'll open the door.
Oh, that's so cute.
It's cute and annoying, but I love her.
My cat was very on his best behavior today during the 2 hours that we did this. So
you love it.
Yeah. But I just don't understand why people would make this in color. Like I
feel like it also takes the liminal space vibe as well. I feel like the black and white very much helps create that atmosphere, and colorizing it. That's so silly. Guys, black and white is not bad.
Right.
You can watch black and white movies. It's fine.
I think that the people that are selling the movie understand that because the colorized version was cheaper than the black and white version by half. I think if you were to buy the black and white version, it was $14.99 on iTunes, and the colorized version was $7.99. So it was almost exactly half.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But so I have to ask, since you watch this every single year, and this is a favorite for you, does it still bring you back to when you were a kid? Does it still terrify you?
Yes. I mean, I try to, especially with The Shining and movies that I really hold sacred like that. I kind of try to put myself in that place mentally whenever I try to create the environment of it has to be night. It can't be daytime. I got to turn the lights off. It's got to be spooky season.
Yeah.
I got to just allow myself to be scared and reach into that nostalgia and that feeling, because what else do we have these days? But so
it's amazing. All right, well, we'll wrap this up. Give us a rating out of 5. Terry, how many creepy men out of 5 do you give Carnival of Souls?
This movie surprised the hell out of me. I went into it. I went into it not really knowing what it was about. I was thinking it was going to be more about a carnival. A carnival obviously features into it, but I was imagining people getting stuck in a carnival and not being able to escape is what I was imagining this movie is about. And so when I started, I'm like, this is nothing like what I expected. And I was like, this movie is surprisingly effective. It's very, like I said, originally, I think some of the direction is a little workman-like. And of course, the acting is a little circumspect in spots because it's not using professional actors in a lot of cases. But yet there's something really incredibly haunting and effective about this film that, again, I was not expecting. I fell in love with this almost immediately. And I just kept getting pulled back in with what is happening in this film that I think that this could be a yearly watch for me. I was really blown away by it. So for me, I honestly think this is probably somewhere between a 4.5 and 5 creepy men out of 5 for me. I loved it. What about you, Mary Beth?
I also give this 5. When it first started, I was like, I wonder where I'm gonna fall. And at the end, I was like, fucking 10 out of 10, amazing, love. We'll be thinking about this for a long time kind of situation. It's a movie that I think, I've said this a million times in this podcast, but it's so ahead of its time in what it's doing with character and with sound and with visuals and with story. It's just something that feels so contemporary and so old at the same time. And it's such a fascinating, I don't know, it's just so impressive in what it is and how it, again, liminal space. It's a liminal movie that exists in this weird setting out of space and time, both for our character, but also just in how it looks and the settings. And it's so impressive to me that it looks so simply created back then. Obviously, it's not so simple, but it looks so effortless almost. And it's so unnerving and so creepy. And I think just once again, I have such a growing respect for filmmakers in that time period and what they're able to make in a time where, you know, we think about these kinds of movies coming out now, but that was 1962, and I think it's just so impressive and incredible that these kinds of films are being made. Like, it's just such an incredible testament to horror, and it just reminds me why I love the genre so much, and I cannot wait to watch it again and have a million thoughts about this ending and what the hell is going on. But Zach, you have the final word. I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is going to be, but how many creepy men out of 5 do you give Carnival of Souls?
I give it 7 creepy men and one ghoul. No, I'm so glad that you guys liked it so much. You know, it's a very special movie to me, and I know it's a special movie to a lot of people in the horror community. It was just really cool to get to gab with you guys about it. I really had a blast.
Thanks for giving me a reason to finally fucking watch this movie, both of us. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And real quick, not to shamelessly promote, I wasn't going to do this, but when you said cosmic horror, black and white, period piece, I have to just say that my YouTube series, The Unknowable, is that. And I really want you to get ready and get psyched because it's coming out this Halloween. I did 10 episodes. It's creepy, weird, bizarre. So that's all I'll say about that.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because when my next part was going to be, where can listeners find you and what do you have coming up that you can share? Because I really wanted you to talk a little bit. Yeah, no, but I love that. So, but yeah, where can listeners find you and what can you share? I mean, you might have shared all that you want to, but what can you share about your YouTube series?
You could find me on Twitter at, I forget what my handle is, but maybe we can put it in the...
We'll put it in the description of the podcast, everyone.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter. And, you know, I'll promote all of the projects that I have on there. Uncomfortably Numb is on the Pocket FM app. The Den is for rent on Amazon or wherever you get you rent your movies. And I have a YouTube series coming out, 10-part series called The Unknowable. And it's going to be really weird, cosmic, black and white, really creepy.
Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Fuck yeah, that's awesome.
Is it gonna be on your personal channel? Is it through some company? Where is it?
So I for this it's under Jackalope Studios.
Okay.
They very low budget little studio that's making a lot of kind of creepy TikToks and weird little shorts that are all just super experimental and very, very funky. And the guy who's running it, Kyle Cooper, basically was like, how would you like to have your own channel on our YouTube thing and it'll be your own show? And I was like, hell yeah, dude, let's go. So I've been toiling away on it for the last few months. It's super weird. It's definitely unlike The Den. It's the furthest thing from that. It's actually probably more in the wheelhouse of Carnival of Souls, which is kind of potentially fitting for it's like, it's in that same zone, area code. But yeah, keep an eye out for it.
Awesome. Hell yeah. So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Carnival of Souls? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.